Hi lads, and welcome back to War Thunder with Koala, and welcome aboard what is quite possibly my favourite prop aircraft in the whole game, the XP-55 Ascender, or Ascender. I guess you could say we're bringing things full circle. We've spent a lot of time recently talking about top tier tech, both in guides and in other content, and we finished off the last major video, which was quite a while ago now, talking about my favourite top tier jet, the Viggen. And now to sort of open up a foray into some lower BR stuff again, we're playing my favourite prop fighter, the XP-55. Why? Why is this low BR, American, weird back-ended prototype my favourite aircraft? And I think the question many of you are immediately going to jump to, is this thing overpowered? Well, possibly. In fact, that's something I want you guys to let me know. We've got a 6-kill game here, we've got a decent amount of time to cover what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and also some extracurricular talking points. And after watching it through, I want you to tell me. Just by watching this game, whether you have this aircraft, you've formulated your own opinion on it already, whether you fought it, perhaps you were in this game with me, but just by watching this match, do you think it shows an overpowered aircraft? Or just that it shows an underperforming enemy team, a, dare I say it, incompetent competition for it. See, I've been thinking a lot recently as I've been sort of gently revamping my content a little bit in preparation for a bigger change that I keep putting off. I should probably stop waiting for the ideal time and just do it. But I've been thinking a lot about why certain actions, and indeed certain statements, are received in different ways by a particular group of people. I call them the I shouldn't have to crowd. These are the Karens of the online gaming community, people that want the rewards that are earned through peak performance without putting in the effort to learn what they're doing or how they could improve to actually earn them, instead resorting to the excuse of I shouldn't have to, it's just a video game, I can play however I want. Yes, you can. But you also want to grind, and in a PvP grinding game, which is what this is, that means competing with other players also trying to do the same thing. If you don't like that, you're playing the wrong game. See, just like any sport or hobby or craft, gaming is a skill. There's skill to it. Online PvP gaming especially, that's why esports exists. And even if you're not someone who cares about the worldwide competitive scene, there's really no difference between you, a casual gamer, and say someone who plays a sport for a local club as a hobby on their Saturday mornings. You know, there's no goal for a profession to come out of it, but there's still learning to be done and skills to be acquired and perhaps mastered. And now, this might be a harsh thing to say, but I think over time the average skill level of War Thunder players has gone down, and so has the amount of effort that people are putting in general into recouping that skill. People just don't want to put in the time to learn. They want to hop in, mess around thoughtlessly, and still be able to grind and enjoy their game. And I don't judge them for that. But what I can say is that a game where people are in general less skilled is much harder to balance and develop accordingly. Now, there are plenty of examples I could go into, my favourite being the nerf to rewards for winning a game to pay off the people who lost it, but the bottom line is Gaijin have, since around 2019, steadily nerfed/removed all the ways in which the more strategically minded, the more skillful players would use their vehicles and use the gameplay mechanics to earn greater rewards, in order to equalise the difference for the less serious players. And they've not made the game harder per se, nor have they made it easier, but what they've done is they've made it easier to do okay with little to no effort, but much less likely for players now to perform exceptionally and earn the higher rewards that come with time and experience and skill. Now why? I don't know. It was a series of very poor decisions in my personal opinion, but more importantly to this discussion, what does that have to do with the XP-55? Well, the XP-55 is the kind of vehicle you might want to call overpowered, and especially if you've only played Americans and you grab this, you might think that this thing is insanely OP. Not only does this aircraft climb very, very well, as you can see, we put it into a 20 degree and just sailed effortlessly all the way up to altitude with these BF-109s, and we're in an up tier. But on the flip side, whilst it's by no means slow, it doesn't dive like other American props at this tier do. It compresses, especially in the rudder regard, as you can see those tiny little rudders on the outer wings. And to top all that off, this thing turns like a monster, which is not something American pilots will be used to. But is it overpowered? Well, for one, how would you tell? And that's what I want you to keep in mind when you see how this match unfolds. Is this a case of an overpowered plane making things super easy, or a regular, balanced aircraft being flown well with, I should say, at least one very good teammate whom you'll see, and I'll point them out later, against a team that just weren't smart enough to figure out how to beat it? So the first thing we do after climbing up to altitude was kind of what I would normally actually call a poor decision. We dive against a lower altitude BF-109, who was no threat to us, and actually up until I got a little closer I thought I was diving on a bomber. And that doesn't matter. What matters is that diving after the first target you see while there are still enemies at your altitude like that is almost always a mistake. You're giving up the advantage. But here it works, because as I look around, I don't have any other teammates around me, which means that the remaining enemy players still at altitude have no other targets to engage that I'm sort of abandoning to their mercy. They will likely come after me. Now the BF-109 we were diving on goes into a head-on, no reason to take that, no reason to risk it, I have every advantage, and then upon being engaged by one of the two other players, I turn into him, evade his shots, wait for him to dive, and then simply follow him down. Unfortunately, he dived into cloud layer, which was about the only thing he could do to lose us. But now we get to see the benefit of having sacrificed that altitude in favour of rejoining our team. See, typically one of the main reasons you wouldn't want to dive like that is because if you need a teammate to support you, they then have to waste all the altitude they'd gained to dive after you. You just pull all three of you down and hand the enemy all the advantages. But that only applies if you have teammates at altitude with you, and in the case of this game, nobody on my team bothered to climb. So fighting those 109s for control of the altitude doesn't do anything for us because none of our team can use it to boom and zoom from, and none of the enemy players are going to be doing anything up there anyway if my team are all down low. So even though in the majority of cases it would be sort of a tactical blunder to give up control of the altitude to the enemy team like that, in this scenario it was actually the right move because our first priority is our team, and it's through team play that you get shots like this. A beautiful bait by the Spitfire here puts the 109F into a stall just in time for me to pass by and get a very easy first kill. But there's no time to chill because we are now going into a 3 versus 2. We've got a Focke-Wulf 190 there, obviously a very hard hitting and great defensive flyer, and a BF-109 G2 Tropical, one of the best energy fighters tier for tier in the entire game. So we simply put the plane into the vertical, where the G2, because he's at low energy, won't be able to follow, turn into him so that the Focke-Wulf is going to take just that little bit longer to re-engage us, and score a nice crit on the G2 as he's stuck in a low speed turn. Fortunately, it wasn't enough to kill him. Why fortunately, you ask? Well, because the 109 isn't dead yet, the Focke-Wulf, expecting me to go and try and finish off the easy kill, immediately goes into a bit of what's called a high yo-yo maneuver. Now, it's a time-saving tactic designed to help an aircraft with a wider turning circle complete a turn more quickly. The thing is, it makes him extremely vulnerable while he does it, and all I have to do is not re-engage the 109 who's going down anyway, and that was the easiest 2v1 I think I've ever had. Meanwhile, the Spitfire has managed to finish off the third enemy player, the TAR 154, so collectively, we've just defeated a third of the enemy team in under 60 seconds. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. These choices that were made in this game, well, they were made for very specific reasons and planned around certain specific outcomes that we knew we were going to get going into that situation. And the enemy team just didn't present as much of a challenge here. We were able to account for everything they might do very, very easily. And this is happening consistently. Having played around with the aircraft for several matches, this was a great clean example, but an outlier. Now that might sound like an obvious sign of an overpowered plane, but out of the various other aircraft in this BR range, most of them could do everything that we've done in this match. None of them are going to struggle if you put them up against enemies who make consistent mistakes, aren't able to anticipate what they should be doing, or just aren't trying, and good luck convincing the I shouldn't have to crowd that they need to side climb to do well with American prop boom and zoomers. What we're looking at here is a sign of a problem, and the problem is that a larger and larger population of the player base just don't seem to know what they're doing. That Focke-Wulf, for example, should easily have known that re-engaging or attempting to re-engage me that quickly was a mistake. So what should he have done instead? Well, firstly, go for separation. He's not a turn fighter, he can't compete with me in a low speed, low altitude dogfight. And secondly, he should have positioned himself in such a way where, for me to defend against his attacks, would have begun to bleed my aircraft of energy. Or else he could have baited me into following him and using his roll rate trying to force me to overshoot. But that requires effort, it requires patience, it requires time put into learning how different aircraft perform and how their weaknesses might be exploited, and people don't want to bother. If there's an easier alternative, like energy, they find the path of least resistance. And now, not to harp on at Gaijin for this, but having removed, for example, the points gain for being in a dogfight, why bother learning how to dogfight anymore? You might as well just let yourself get shot down, because you actually earn more for it, and it requires no effort from you, and you get more matches in. Now, to get back to the match at hand, we chased down the retreating bomber before he could get back to his airfield to potentially abuse AAA. I put a nice crit in, which is going to be enough to take him out of the match. At this point, there is little the enemy team could do, but with 4 kills under our belts, obviously we want the ace, so it's time to re-engage, in fact the BF-109 F4 who we first saw up at altitude at the beginning of the match. Again, we avoid the head-on because you should never risk a head-on pass if you have the advantage, which we very much do. We have the teammates around us, we have the energy advantage. But before we can execute the F4, another BF-109 comes out of nowhere, completely undetected until he was firing at me. Luckily, it wasn't enough to kill me. Now we're in a 2v1 however, with at least one enemy that has an energy advantage. And here as well I have to give a massive shout out to Modgade and the Spitfire. He engages the first 109 who's back to focusing on me, and while the F4 tropical variant now switches targets to him, I can regain my energy, fail to put a first shot in, but the Spitfire and I have now completely tied up both of these 109s. Neither of them can switch targets, they can't coordinate with each other, and neither of them can use what their aircraft is good at. It's the exact same thing we did with the Focke-Wulf and the G2 earlier. And as the F4 trop goes for separation here, it is just too little too late. And we're not missing a shot like that a second time. So what we've just done is taken 2 very different aircraft, neither of which are designated energy fighters, and worked together to bleed 2 BF-109s of their energy. A near impossible task if these players had played correctly. That's an ace match, and for the extra kill here, I had intended to let the Spitfire finish off the final player, he definitely deserved it, but as he slightly loses the target, I put 2 quick bursts in, first one crit, second one finishes him off, and that's going to be a GG. Now the XP-55 is an amazing plane, and I think one that it is well worth anybody to pick up, and use my link when you do. Unlike other American props, this thing is not a boom and zoomer, which is why I think outside its experimental sort of status, it works well as a premium, or in fact if it were being added today, it would make an excellent event or battle pass vehicle. It's unique, it's not what you expect, and it's not what you really learn when you play the American tech trade. But is it overpowered? Well, it might be, but I think, or at least I hope, that most of you will have come to the same conclusion I did, and that by looking at this match, though it was a very good result, I don't know. I mean, with all the mistakes the enemy team were making, if you're looking for evidence that this thing is overpowered, this ain't it, Chief. And even though, yes, we downed half the enemy team ourselves, obviously with the help of Modgade and the Spitfire, who was a random squad mate by the way, I've never met this player before, but who also had a really good match, and I have to say thanks for the perfect execution of the teamwork. All I can say about the XP-55 is that it's great, but it's not about the plane, or the BR, or the matchmaker, so much as it is the pilot, and the teams. And with the state of this enemy team, I don't think a P-38 or a Typhoon could have accomplished much the same result. Now, to finish off this video, we just need to solve one final mystery. Is this thing called the Ass Ender because its propeller is on its ass? Or is it because it's coming to destroy your ass? The BMP can be considered the very first of its kind of infantry fighting vehicles, and is still in widespread service today. The easily recognisable machine has spawned a wide variety of variations, and served with over 65 nations since its debut in the mid-1960s. Like the MiG-21 of the skies, the BMP has proven an adaptable and timeless platform, remaining useful to this day in some very modern militaries.